Every time you take a bite of food, it affects your hormones, your brain chemistry, your metabolism, your gut flora, your gene expression, your immune system.
It starts with water. All of your neurons, your dendrites and axon terminals, these are all operating in a water medium. It's how everything is communicating and being moved throughout your brain is based on a water superhighway. I want to talk now about, you mentioned earlier that, calories are not created equal, and what we're looking at here is, what is this calorie? Let's take the comparison of broccoli and Doritos, right?
Yeah.
This is going to impact your body very differently if it's 300 calories of each. And why is that? What is the main component behind the scenes? Why are they different in how they affect us?
Well, what we now know is that every time you take a bite of food, it affects your hormones, your brain chemistry, your metabolism, your gut flora, your gene expression, your immune system, right? And it's not the calories that do that per se, it's the quality of the information in the food.
Right.
So you can turn on all the signals for health and disease by eating a Dorito. Same calories, you're turn on all the signals for health and healing eating, let's say, broccoli or almonds. And it's a very, very different effect. For example, let's just take like a great example of like a big gulp, right? A big gulp is 750 calories. It's got ridiculous amounts of sugar, like 70 something grams of sugar. It has no fiber. When you consume it, it causes your liver to become inflamed. It causes your triglycerides to go up, your HDLs to go down, your body to produce insulin. It stores belly fat. It lowers your testosterone. And it makes you hungry. It causes you to lose muscle. It increases stress hormones. All these things are happening dynamically when you consume a big gulp. If you have 750 calories of broccoli, that's 21 cups of broccoli. I mean, good luck if you can eat 21 cups of broccoli. It's
Right.
got, 35 grams of fiber. It's got no sugar. It doesn't affect your body in the same way. It doesn't turn on insulin. It doesn't make you have a fatty liver. It doesn't screw up your cholesterol. It doesn't lower your hormones. It actually increases detoxification, prevents cancer, helps you detox metals, helps increase your healthy gut flora. Exactly the same calories, profoundly different effects on the body.
That's so powerful. Just for us to really kind of take a second and let that sink in, that the whole thing with this calorie myth that all calories are created equal, this has long been banished. And you even have research in your book indicating how, particular foods, if somebody eats maybe a higher ratio of healthy dietary fats, that they'll actually lose more weight over the same amount of time, not doing any more exercise, compared to people who are eating a higher carbohydrate diet with same calories.
Yeah, exactly. So what we now know is that certain calories raise insulin. Carbohydrates predominantly, mostly grains or flour particularly, and sugar, anything that turns to sugar. And that fat doesn't raise insulin. So if you take, for example, a type 1 diabetic, this is an easy example for people to understand. They don't make insulin. Their pancreas shut down. These people are eating 10,000 calories a day. They're not gaining a pound. They're losing weight eating 10,000 calories a day, right? Because they have no insulin, and insulin's required to store the fat. And they're eating carbs, they're eating sugar, they're eating fat, whatever. They're eating whatever, but they still can't gain weight because they have no insulin. When you eat carbohydrates, you spike insulin and it stores fat. It slows your metabolism. It locks the fat in the fat cells. It makes you hungry. When you eat fat, you don't produce insulin. So if you reduce carbs dramatically, and you increase fat, you can't combine them because that's deadly. I call that sweet fat. You actually will increase your metabolism by about 300 to 400 calories a day. That's like running an hour a day without getting off the couch, even if you're eating the same amount of calories. And this study has been done. In fact, last week in the Journal of the American Medical Association, there was an amazing article about ketogenic diets and type 2 diabetes and weight loss, showing that when you dramatically increase fat in the diet, you correct all the cardiovascular risk factors, you increase the speed of your metabolism, you cause far more weight loss. In type 2 diabetics, you get them off insulin, off their medications, and their blood sugars are better than when they were on medication. And I see this all the time. We're at Cleveland Clinic, and we've run pilots where we've taken the most treatment-resistant diabetics who are on tons of meds, on insulin. We get them off all of that in 8 weeks, and their blood sugars are far better and almost normal compared to the ones when they were on the drugs. So we have the ability to actually show how this is working. And there's a big study going on now at Harvard. It's a $12 million study funded independently by a philanthropist who wants to show this. And they're locking people in a resort. They're feeding them either a very high fat diet, very low carb, or the opposite, low fat, high carb. And they're measuring what happens on the same amount of calories. And they're seeing what they take in, what their metabolism is. And the data is just so compelling. And yet the truth is, Shawn, that every doctor, nutritionist, public health association, government, food industry, all still say the mantra, eat less, exercise more. It's based on outdated science, and it's harmful for people because it blames the victim. It's your fault, you're fat, just eat less, exercise more. Well, if your brain's hijacked, willpower is a fiction. You can't, right?
Right. You know, well, first of all, I'm thinking about even the American Diabetic Association, the recommendations for nutrition, and they're literally telling people to eat foods that can spike insulin.
Yeah.
And the reality is this. And so, by the way, this is gonna, I'm gonna have a little controversy here today because,
Okay.
there's films out there like What the Health, right?
Oh yeah.
Where there's a
That was a great propaganda movie.
a licensed physician saying, you know what, diabetes is not caused by sugar, it's caused by fat intake. All right. So before I see you like, all right, so here's the thing. Listen, guys, this is what I want you to do. Make sure to pick up Dr. Hyman's new book, Food, What the Heck Should I Eat? Because let me tell you this, all of us, everybody listening, all of us, our family, we understand there's a lot of conflicting information out there. And there's a lot of different choices. And there are a lot of things that are right. And there are also some things that are pretty dangerous that are considered to be right. And so what he's doing is taking the best of each of these fields, whether it's vegetarian food, whether it's paleo food, whether it's a ketogenic approach. And he's looking at, let's actually look at the data. Let's have a talk about it and also use our rational common sense in the mix, So before we get to the controversy, I want to know what inspired you personally to write this. I know for me, this is one of the things we work on here with the show is drilling down and getting to the heart of the matter. So what was the inspiration for you?
Well, the inspiration is I've been studying nutrition for 40 years. I've read tens and thousands of papers. I've treated tens of thousands of patients. And the question that always comes up is, what should I eat? Yeah. People just are confused. They don't know. They don't understand. And they're making bad choices, not because they don't want to do the right thing, because they just don't know. And I think there's so much conflicting information out there. One day eggs are good, bad, then they're good. One day steak is bad, then it's good. One day butter's bad, then it's good. Or one day oatmeal's good, then it's bad. It's like enough to make anybody crazy and just say, heck with it. I give up and I'm going to eat whatever I want. The truth is, we know a lot. When you combine the full body of scientific literature, not just cherry picking studies that support your point of view, and you look at the clinical picture, which, I have a rare opportunity because I've been testing metabolic rates and nutritional status and blood tests and cholesterol and cardiovascular risk factors for 30 years and using diet and food to manipulate those numbers and to affect the quality of people's health. So I've seen this. It's not just some crazy idea I have that I read in a book. It's actually based on experience plus common sense plus sort of a sense of our evolutionary biology and what makes sense. Does it make sense for us to consume 1,000 times more refined vegetable oils than we did 100 years ago? Probably not. Does it make sense for us to consume, 150 pounds of sugar when we maybe had 22 teaspoons of sugar a year when we were out hunting gathering? Probably not, right? These are just common sense things. So you combine all those things, and I really felt like people needed to get a book where they will go one-stop shopping and look at each category of the foods we eat: meat, poultry, fish, dairy, vegetables, fruit, nuts, seeds, beans, grains, sweeteners, sugars, beverages, and know what to choose in each of those categories based on, one, what's the science, what it does to your body, the effects on the planet, on human rights, and on our greater societies. So you can make an educated choice about eating food that's good for you, good for the planet, and good for the world. And I think that's really the goal of this book. Is very simple, very clear, addressing all the key topics of controversy. So if you've ever said, what about blah, it's in the book. Because I've been asked these questions so many times, so I know the questions that people have. And I've sifted through the science and made it really simple and clear. So by the end, you have resources of where to go. Let's say you want to find the cheap grass-fed beef online. Where do you go? Let's say you want to know which vegetables should you eat organic or not, and what matters. Here's where you go to find out. And I go through all that in the book, and it's hopefully a guide that people can use forever. You can keep it in your kitchen, you can keep it whether when you go to the grocery store, you can share with your friends and family. It's really, for me, I feel like my favorite book I've ever written because it gives people a holistic view of
Yeah.
food and nutrition. And it also includes some of the political, social, environmental aspects as well.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that was very enlightening to see as well. So that's what I want to talk about is let's jump back now and look at this controversy, right? When we have a physician out there who's, sharing this propaganda, something that is like just this is totally against human physiology, saying that it's fat that's causing diabetes. So let's talk about that. You have a section in here talking about fats and oils. So where did this like insane information? And by the way, let's start with the coconut thing, right? Coconut was slammed in the media a little while ago. It was everywhere. People were
Yeah.
posting me, Shawn, what do you think about this? So let's
Yeah.
talk about saturated fat and the truth about whether or not it's fat that's really bad for you or whether it's this issue with insulin.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. Yeah, it's such a controversy. And I think, what you said in that movie, What the Health, was, a guy in a white coat who seems like an intelligent man who's a trained physician with a license says sugar and carbohydrates have nothing to do with diabetes or obesity. And another guy in the movie says, Garth Davis says, carbohydrates can't be stored. Only fat can be stored. Now, this is just basic biochemistry. I mean, maybe they missed their biochemistry class. And the reason they believe this is not based on science, it's based on dogma. So
Yeah.
you can't let your beliefs and your dogma overtake science and disrupt your point of view. I don't have a particular belief. I've been a vegetarian, a vegan, I've been paleo, I've been everything in between. And, I'm trying to understand what works. I'm curious about what really works. Now, this whole issue about fat, I wrote a whole book called Eat Fat, Get Thin, where I address this in detail.
Yeah.
But the issue is really how do we understand what happens when you eat fat and sugar? We touched on it, but if you eat fat, it seems logical that fat makes you fat, right? It's the same word. It looks the same when you cut it open, and it seems like it has more calories and carbs and protein. So logically, if you eat less fat, you're going to lose weight. Problem is, biology is not so simple.
Yeah.
And when you eat fat, you actually stimulate metabolism. You cut your hunger. You release fat from the fat cells. It's called lipolysis. You actually stimulate your metabolism to burn 300 calories more a day. Whereas if you eat carbs and sugar and starch, even a lot of grains, you raise your insulin. And insulin is the key hormone that's driving almost all chronic disease, from cancer to heart disease to diabetes to Alzheimer's, and even things like depression. So we have to understand that as long as we have high insulin levels, we're going to be struggling to lose weight and to feel healthy and reverse disease. So that's why this whole movement towards higher fat diets is happening. In fact, even the Dietary Guidelines Committee removed any upper limit on fat, and they said cholesterol is not an issue anymore. They're still restricting saturated fat. And here's the problem. You asked about coconut oil. I did a Facebook Live on coconut oil. There was like over 1.5 million views, and I'm like, holy cow, people are so confused.
Yeah.
And you've got the American Heart Association, which, by the way, gets most of its money from the food industry and the pharma industry, as well as the American Diabetic Association. The American Nutrition Dietetic Association gets 40% of its funding from the processed food industry. I mean, they're the ones giving us nutritional advice.
Right.
So when the American Heart Association put out this report, they said coconut oil is bad because it has saturated fat. Now, here's the problem with that logic. There's never been a single study that's ever proved that coconut oil causes heart disease. It's guilt by association. So this all came back 50 years ago or more from this guy, Ansel Keys, who said, let's study a few countries and see who gets what and what they're eating, and maybe we can find out the cause of heart disease. Well, he found out that people ate more fat, and saturated fat had more heart disease. Turns out he left out a lot of countries that disproved his theory, like France, that ate butter and cream like it was going out of style, and they had the lowest heart disease risks, right?
Yeah.
And then never really proved it. And then that became the meme, and he was a very powerful figure and actually convinced the world of his point of view, which turned out to be wrong. And then we moved on to the late 60s when two nutrition scientists at Harvard and doctors were paid by the sugar industry, the equivalent of $50,000, to publish a study in the New England Journal, which at that point didn't require a conflict of interest statement, to show that fat was the enemy and sugar was fine. Well, that went on. That guy went on to run the government's Dietary Guidelines Committee on the first one under George McGovern, and that led to this whole era of low fat. And then we got the food pyramid, and we went in this whole spiral. And if you look at the statistics, you see that when we came out with the food pyramid, the guidelines, the rate of obesity and diabetes skyrocketed like a hockey stick.
Yep.
And now we're kind of turning the tide back a little bit. It's very hard. And I think most people still believe that fat is bad. They eat skim milk, low-fat yogurt, low-fat foods, low-fat salad dressing, and this is really dangerous. Now, the key thing to remember is you cannot add fat to your diet if you're still eating starch and sugar, right? A little bit, okay, but if the majority of your diet is grains and starch and sugar, it's deadly. So I would really never do that. Coconut oil is something that does raise cholesterol. So their view is if you have saturated fat, it raises cholesterol. Cholesterol causes heart disease. Cholesterol causes heart disease, and you shouldn't actually eat anything that raises your LDL cholesterol. Well, that whole theory has kind of been broken. And here's how, a couple of reasons. One, there was a major study actually done by the guy who was trying to prove that saturated fat was bad, Ansel Keys, and another guy, a researcher, I think from University of Minnesota, back in the late 60s and 70s. This kind of study could never be done today because it's unethical. They took 9,000 people who were basically institutionalized in mental institutions, and they did an experiment on them without their consent, and they gave half of them saturated fat and half of them corn oil. And then they followed them, which is almost impossible to do this kind of study anywhere else because people live in their free world, they eat whatever they want, you can't control their diets. So they controlled their diets, and they found that the group that had the corn oil actually lowered the LDL cholesterol. That was good. But for every 30-point drop in LDL cholesterol, there was a 22% increase in heart attacks and death. So the lower your cholesterol, the worse you were. And the saturated fat group did way better. They didn't publish the study. Why? Because it contradicted their entire worldview. So they stuffed it in a basement. And it wasn't until last year that researchers from the National Institutes of Health dug it up and actually published it and was like, what,
This is sounding like a movie right now, Mark.
Oh my God. Malcolm Gladwell did a great revisionist history podcast on this. It was really quite good.
Oh,
and then, of course, we have 17 meta-analyses of studies showing there's no link between saturated fat and heart disease. None. From observational studies, from interventional studies, from blood levels of fatty acid studies. Nobody can find a link when they actually looked at it. It was just all an idea.
Yeah.
And so now we still have this idea that saturated fat is bad, and the American Heart Association is still stuck on that. And so that's why they say coconut oil is bad because it's saturated fat. Saturated fat raises LDL. That causes heart attack. That theory has just been debunked.
You know what? I think at some point.
And then there's, of course, what's called the thermic effect of feeding. And so certain foods have a higher thermic effect than others, meaning that your body is going to burn energy. It's going to burn off calories just digesting the food alone without you having to do anything other than eat it. And high protein foods are going to have the highest thermic effect, high protein whole foods. And the lowest thermic effect are going to come from, can you guess, ultra processed foods. And that's because whole foods burn about twice the calories just via digestion alone as ultra processed foods. And when it comes to macronutrient composition, ultra processed foods are primarily constituted of carbs and fat, right? Carbs and fat are that sort of ultra palatable, it just lends a really great mouthfeel. It sends our dopamine, reward centers in the brain, like, it's like the 4th of July fireworks when we eat foods that combine usually sugar and fat. But people might know that fat has 9 calories per gram, carbohydrates and protein have 4 calories per gram. But actually, when you look at the thermic effect of these macronutrients, protein actually has 3 calories per gram because a third of the protein calories that you consume get burned off. So you're actually you're getting a bit of a metabolic advantage by prioritizing protein. And that's one of the dietary recommendations that I make in the Genius Life. I go sort of big on protein, which is something that, people in the fitness community have known the value of protein, but I think the population at large has kind of gotten a little bit confused about the value of protein because you hear things in the media all the time like we're eating too much protein, protein's not good for you, it's bad for your kidneys, none of which is actually true. And I think as a tool to satiate your hunger, protein is the most satiating macronutrient, and that caloric advantage that you get. I think that's one of the more practical recommendations that I make for in terms of diet, that just by focusing on protein, prioritizing protein, most people will experience a spontaneous weight loss, especially if you're eating a low protein diet.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so powerful, man. It's doing so many different things, like the thermic effect, but also, it's this essential. It's a building block for communication in your body. Your hormones, your neurotransmitters, so many benefits. And man, I'm so glad that you brought this up. This is something, again, I've been really talking about and thinking about and wanting to press in popular culture, because there's a lot of infighting with the carbs and fats, and protein sitting over here like, I get no respect. You know what I mean? And it's so important. It's such a powerful fuel. But I think that even going back a little bit and talking about the public perception, which is we're eating too much protein. And one of the reasons is, like, we see is processed meats, for example. You'll see the commercial with the KFC stacker.
Yeah.
Like, you got the fried chicken bun, right? Each bun is a chicken, and then I think it's like a burger or something in the middle with like bacon. I don't know. It's just
man.
like, yeah, I mean, yeah. But then we have just how folks have evolved. You know what I'm saying? And no matter which place we look in the blue zones all over the world, we're seeing a source of protein coming into play, but we're not talking about it enough. So I'm so glad you brought that up. But I want to go back and talk about that driving force when you talk about sugar and fat coming together. And so for me, it's like, and I know you grew up much the same way, it's like Eggos. Let go of my Eggo.
Yeah.
With some butter on there. You got the Pop-Tarts. You've got, all these different snack cakes and cookies and all these different things. When you combine these together, and you offer up a great tip in the book, and just like put a potato in the oven. So can you share that example?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can see the nature of hyperpalatability at work. If you just do this little thought experiment, you can actually do it in your kitchen if you have a baked potato around. But if you were to bake a plain baked potato, you probably wouldn't be inclined to over-consume that potato. I mean, maybe you'll take a few mouthfuls, but it's really not going to be all that palatable. Interestingly enough, potatoes are pretty satiating. But they're just not. I think that the reason for that is that they're not very good. People don't really want to eat much more, after just a few forkfuls. But if you take that same baked potato and then you add fat to it, like let's say some grass-fed butter, which I've certainly indulged in a baked potato with grass-fed butter. You're adding fat to it, then you put some salt on it. Suddenly, that baked potato, the combination of those three elements makes it hyper palatable. You're going to want to eat the whole thing. You might even go back for seconds. But the baked potato by itself, not all that palatable. The butter by itself, not all that. I mean, nobody's walking around eating sticks of butter, right?
Well,
maybe Dave Asprey.
Yeah.
The salt, and that's another thing. Like that, a lot of people will say that sugar is addictive. I think that statement requires a little bit of investigation as well, because it's not like you see people mainlining pure sugar necessarily, but it's the combination of all those things that really trips up your brain's satiety checkpoints and hunger checkpoints, and it's at the root cause, I think, of the modern obesity epidemic, where by the year 2050, 1 in 2 adults are going to be obese, which is just insane to consider.
Crazy, man. Crazy. So your book, Genius Food's first book.
Yeah.
That's really the focus on food, nutrition. This is the genius life in this book. And you're traversing into other domains that help to create an overall healthy, sovereign human being. And one of the things you highlight, and just to talk a little bit about the food a little bit more, but it's not just the food, but also when you eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so you brought up some of the incredible data, and we're talking about, things like intermittent fasting, but just overall fasting in general. And so I want to talk about the mTOR. I want to talk a little bit about mTOR and how that plays into things when we're talking about fasting, longevity, and AMPK. I like AMPK.
Yeah, AMPK. Yeah, I mean, this is so cool. This is the first time I've been asked about these, actually. So basically, these are two of your body's chief nutrient sensors. So it's sort of like a thermostat that your body uses, for lack of a better term, that your body knows that your body uses to gauge nutrient status in the body, nutrient status, energy availability, things like that. For an organism, energy availability is a very pressing concern. Are you going to have enough energy available to navigate the world, to procure food, to procreate, and ultimately to survive? So your body has these nutrient sensors. AMPK is one of them. mTOR is another one of them. mTOR is primarily sensitive to dietary protein, and in particular, an amino acid called leucine. Leucine is not bad or good, but it is the most anabolic or growth promoting of the amino acids. So anybody who's ever been interested in bodybuilding or fitness knows that you need to get adequate leucine to grow muscle and to get strong. But mTOR activation, which occurs when we consume leucine, also has a dark side. Too much mTOR activation is thought to underlie the growth of tumors and cancer, things like that. AMPK is sort of a nutrient sensor that gauges the overall energy availability in the body. And how this works, it's pretty interesting. So the chief energy currency of cells is ATP. And when ATP gets used up, it basically becomes AMP, which is sort of like an energy depleted form of ATP. And when there's a lot of...
I think of AMP, kinda.
AMP.
That's just how I think.
AMP, kinda. Yeah. But essentially, when too much AMP builds up in the cell, that's a sign that there's not enough energy, right? And so it activates AMP kinase, which is a pathway. It's a protein that basically sends a signal that there's not enough energy around. We need to create more energy. So it actually encourages the burning of fat, the burning of sugar. It's basically just like a land grab for energy when AMPK is activated. And it also helps to create new mitochondria. So it boosts insulin sensitivity. It is one of the pathways responsible for mitochondrial biogenesis, which is the creation of healthy new mitochondria. And the way to activate AMPK, which is thought to be this longevity pathway, also metformin, the diabetes drug metformin, activates AMPK. And this is one of the reasons why metformin is being looked at as a potential, fasting mimetic, a longevity promoting drug. I wouldn't recommend metformin because studies have shown that it can reduce the benefits associated with exercise. But nonetheless, so AMPK is this generally very beneficial thing, and it's thought to underlie the mechanism by which calorie restriction seems to be one of the most reliable ways to extend lifespan in smaller organisms. So you restrict calories, AMPK becomes activated because of that deficit of energy. You can also activate AMPK with high-intensity exercise, because what you're doing when you're doing high-intensity interval training, for example, like getting on that assault bike or swinging the battle ropes, or even with resistance training, you're creating a momentary energy crisis in your muscle cells that are like, oh my God, there's not enough energy around. If we don't generate enough energy, we're not going to survive, right? And so AMPK activates, mTOR is suppressed, and so it's those are the two mechanisms by which exercises and calorie restriction are meant to really be beneficial for the body. And these are also the proposed mechanisms by which intermittent fasting is supposed to work. So when we intermittent fast, for a time we're depriving the body of energy, we're depriving the body of protein. And so what you get is an upregulation of AMPK, a downregulation of mTOR, and both of these facts are thought to be longevity promoting. They're thought to reduce cancer incidence. Also, mTOR suppression is what drives, or one of the factors that drives autophagy, which is what I call like the KonMari method for biology. Marie Kondo, it's like she's all about tidying up. So That's how your cells actually tidy up. They clean out worn out dysfunctional proteins and organelles and things like that. And so when you calorie restrict, when you intermittent fast, when you do high intensity exercise, you're basically activating all of those wonderful pathways. And the beautiful thing about exercise and intermittent fasting and calorie restriction is that unlike drugs like, say, metformin, which I mentioned earlier, these pharmaceuticals really work on singular biological pathways or chemicals. Exercise, calorie restriction, intermittent fasting works the whole system out. And, it's so evolutionarily, it makes so much sense, and it's so comprehensive in terms of its effect on the body. That's why I think, these sort of lifestyle interventions should always be a first line of defense against the diseases of aging and even aging itself.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. This is neuronutrition, and these are the things we're talking about today that can truly take your incredible brain, the most complex, powerful entity in the known universe, and turn it up a notch. Turn it up 10 notches, 10,000. Put in a hyperspeed, right? We have this concept in our culture like the limitless pill, like there's something you could do to activate more of your brain's potential. These principles are so powerful, so profound, but unfortunately, most folks have not been given this very simple owner's manual on how all this stuff works. And today we're going to go from the very bare bone basics to the things that add in that extra level of performance that most folks don't know about. All right, so we're going to start at the very foundation of what creates the human brain and the brain's performance. Your brain, you've probably heard this before, but we're going to take this to another level today. Your brain is mostly made of water. It's upwards of about 80% water. Your brain is actually the consistency of soft butter. You know when you leave the butter sitting out? Well, some folks just do that. They leave the butter sitting out on the table. They got the glass thing over the butter. Some people are appalled by that. You don't keep the butter out. You keep the butter in the fridge. But the consistency of the human brain is the same as soft butter. Now, that being said, your brain is upwards of 80% water. Here's why this matters. Your brain cells themselves, when I talked about food making up your body, water supersedes everything. And you want to think of water in a nutritional context because we tend to put food and water. We tend to separate things. But most food is abundant in water, just in nature. Water is the looked over macronutrient. All right, we have 5 major macronutrients, not 3: fats, proteins, carbohydrates. Alcohol is another macronutrient. We talk about that in Eat Smarter too. It's going to trip you out. Water, the most powerful of all the macronutrients because it makes up the most of your body and your body's performance. A recent study cited in Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise that I highlight in Eat Smarter found that just a 2% drop in your body's baseline hydration level can lead to impairment in mental tasks requiring your attention, motor coordination, and executive functions. So this is the prefrontal cortex determining your ability to problem solve. They mention things like map recognition goes down. So just finding your way around. I know we've got the GPS now. All right. But do you remember when you just used to have to find something? All right. Our ability to do that plummets. Grammatical reasoning, proofreading, mental math, all of those things, just a 2% drop in our optimal hydration rate causes these side effects. Tell me again what kind of pill you're looking for to make your brain work better. It starts with water. It's foundational because all of your neurons, your dendrites and axon terminals, the things that I mentioned earlier, these are all operating in a water medium. It's how everything is communicating and being moved throughout your brain is based on a water superhighway. Now, here's something really cool. This is going to take this from the foundational level up a notch. It's not just water in of itself. Your brain, the blood-brain barrier, has superhighways, express pathways for water to get to your brain because it's that important. All right. So when you're hydrating, when you're drinking that water, hopefully you're getting a little thirsty right now. When you're guzzling that water, just know like, oh man, this is definitely going right to my brain because that hungry brain of yours is very, very dedicated to ensuring that it's getting the water that it needs. Now, here's the thing, and I've been talking about this for many years now. Nationwide, worldwide, the public at large gets access to this information. That's the virility of a book and the ability to get into people's hands that in other circumstances wouldn't get access to this information. It's very, very powerful and special. But when I was in school, even in my traditional university classes, I was taught the importance of H2O. We were taught water is H2O. But the truth is, H2O does not exist anywhere in nature. It doesn't exist anywhere in nature. Now, I know you're like, what is he talking about? Water is known as the universal solvent. You will not find H2O by itself anywhere in nature. It's always integrated with other things, namely minerals. All right, so it's H2O with other things dissolved into it. Constantly, that's what's happening in nature. All right, so do we want to drink pure H2O? No, absolutely not. Humans have never drank pure H2O. It's always H2O with other things integrated into it. And so we do have systems of cleaning our water, of course, that we want to be mindful of to eliminate pathogens and potential chemicals and things like that. So we could do reverse osmosis or whatever the case might be. There's many different ways to go about finding clean water sources, but we have to be mindful that water needs structure. Your water and your brain need the number one thing that should be coming along with your water, which is electrolytes. For example, sodium. Not only does this electrolyte help to maintain proper water balance, so number one, it helps to maintain the water balance in your brain. You need sodium for this purpose. These electrolytes are, and even listen to the word, light, right? We lighten it up. Electrolytes. These are minerals that carry an electric charge. What kind of currency is your brain running on? These electrical currencies. The human brain is critically dependent upon electrolytes to send electric signals throughout all the cells in your brain. This is how important electrolytes are. It's not just about, we know about it from the commercials, to get the sweat, we need to get the electrolytes. Your brain primarily is going to be looking for these electrolytes to keep the lights on. So in mentioning sodium, and this is one of the cool studies that's highlighted in Eat Smarter, researchers at McGill University found that sodium literally functions as an on-off switch in the brain for specific neurotransmitters that support optimal function and protect the brain against numerous diseases. All right, this is how important these electrolytes are. It's like an on-off switch for your brain to actually do processes and protect itself. In our culture, sodium and salt are synonymous because salt is our greatest source in our diets of sodium, but they're two different things, right? Sodium chloride. So we want to be aware of that little distinction, but we do want to be aware that salt historically, and we actually dive into that in depth in Eat Smarter, it's been one of the most valuable things in human evolution is sources of salt. But the salt that most of us get in our diets is from processed foods. That is a heavily refined, just denatured, processed, toxicant added, fillers and preservatives. Not that kind of salt. We're talking about real salt from nature. All right. There's so many different types of high quality salt, but this might be something you might want to add to your water to provide it some structure and also to provide those electrolytes for your brain. Also, of course, natural foods are abundant. They're absolutely abundant in electrolytes, particularly fruits and vegetables. So this is just one electrolyte, but I cannot not tell you this. You've got to know this one today. There is another massively overlooked and underestimated electrolyte that affects so many different parts of our performance and our biology overall. And specifically today, you're going to know how important it is for the function and performance of your brain. A fascinating new study published in the journal Neuron found that magnesium is able to restore critical brain plasticity and improve cognitive performance. This electrolyte is able to literally restore brain plasticity. And brain plasticity is the ability of your brain to adapt and to change. This was a thing that was believed to not be possible for many years. That the brain, you got what you got. You got what you got, and it's just degradation from there on out. However, today we know that we can improve the brain. We can grow new brain cells in certain parts of the brain, and your brain can evolve and change and grow and adapt. Magnesium is critical in this performance. And here's another one. A double-blind, placebo-controlled study published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease found that improving magnesium levels in adult test subjects, these were folks at risk in their elderly years, so around between 50 and 70, could potentially reverse brain aging by over 9 years. Improving their magnesium levels could reverse brain aging by over 9 years. This is something you just don't hear about. Even with Alzheimer's, it's just largely considered to be, there's nothing you can do about it. You can try to slow it down. We're starting to finally understand there are things we can do to help to reverse and protect the brain, but also reverse the degradation. Magnesium is critical in this. It's another powerful electrolyte, but magnesium, as I'm really highlighting throughout Eat Smarter in relationship to metabolism, cognitive performance, our emotional intelligence, it's an important anti-stress buffer, but it's responsible for over 650 biochemical processes we're aware of. Just a couple years ago, it was 350 that we knew about, we can confirm. Now 650. That means it's 650 things your body cannot do or do properly without adequate levels of magnesium. Guess what the number one mineral deficiency is in our country? Magnesium. About 60% of the population is chronically deficient in this powerful anti-stress, brain fortifying mineral. We have to change it. People are walking around with brains that are just not working right and wondering why we can't get along and we can't ask questions. We can't have high level, evolved, intelligent conversations. We have to get our brains healthier so we can make this stuff happen. It's not that it's impossible. If our brain health isn't well, it just makes it harder. What if we make it easier to have connection? This is one of those things. So this is just a snippet of what's in Eat Smarter. Make sure to get your copy today. It means so much to me, but I know that this is coming right now at this time in human history because we need a shift. We have to take control of our health, the health of our families, and our communities. And now we have the resources to do it. All right, so please make sure to get your copy today. If you already got a copy, if you already pre-ordered one, get another one. Go to the bookstore, go to your local bookstore, get yourself another copy of Eat Smarter. Order another copy. Get a copy for a friend, family member. All of that helps to energize and let these entities know that this is what we want. We want books like this. We want information like this. We demand it. So please know that when you get a copy of the book, it's not just something that's going to add so much value to your life, but it's voting with your dollar and showing the market what the market should be providing to the public. So it really does mean a lot. So it's the foundation. We're just scratching the surface. All right. Water is the most important macronutrient for your brain, coupled with these electrolytes. And now we're going to talk about the other constituents that make up the human brain and what we need to bring in dietarily. And in looking at the brain being around 80% water, what else is it made of? And that next factor of those micronutrients is fat. All right. This is the one that's in popular culture that's talked about a lot in the world of health and nutrition. Your brain is mostly made of fat. It's actually water predominantly, but that ratio of fat is also incredibly important. If we're talking about the dry weight of the brain, if you want to look at it like that, your brain is about 11% fat, followed closely by about 8% proteins, 3% minerals, and a little sprinkling of the carbs and other compounds, because the carbohydrate or sugar molecules that are floating around in the body, your brain uses that stuff very quickly. All right, so it's not a lot just kind of hanging out in the human brain, but about 11% fat, 8% proteins. All right, these amino acids are very important as well, but let's focus on fat. All right, you got that fat head. All right, this was a universal diss. All right, being called a fat head. Hey, fat head. It wasn't cool, but now you're gonna know. Fathead is actually, it's pretty dope. It's pretty sexy. All right, now, this is the thing. When we think about the brain mostly being fat, it's not that the fats that you eat dietarily directly end up in your brain. We have to get clear on this, okay? Eating fat does not make you fat directly, and also eating fat does not directly feed your fat brain. All right, these are two different things biochemically: fat in food and fat in your brain and on your tissues. And this leads us to the conversation about the different types of fat in the human body. All right, in the first section focused on metabolism in Eat Smarter, we talk about storage fats. So these are fats that actually store energy that we evolved to have that are critical to our survival, right? These storage fats, this is the white adipose tissue. This is the subcutaneous fat, the visceral fat, and the intramuscular fat. These are storage fats. Your brain does not have storage fats. This is something totally different. These are structural fats. The human brain is structural fats, not storage fats. It's an evolutionary development because in times of famine, if your brain was made of storage fats, theoretically speaking, your body would start to eat your brain. Your brain would eat itself, and like built-in zombie food, basically, if you were experiencing a time when you didn't have food. So this is why the brain itself is not made of storage fats. It's made of structural fats. And so in creating that structure, a lot of the structural fats are actually developed and kind of infused into our brains when we're babies, and when we're little babies, right? Specifically saturated fat, critical to brain development, right? The brain is sopping up saturated fats like a biscuit. When you're a baby, mother's milk is upwards of 50% saturated fat. Did nature make a mistake? Saturated fat's been vilified, then vindicated, and vilified, and vindicated. And then even now, like recently, it came out again, saturated fats, it's gonna kill you. It's a big difference between saturated fats found in processed foods and also saturated fats found in nature. Right off the bat, that differentiation is typically not made when you hear these studies about how bad saturated fat is. But just look at the number one primary human food. You know, mother's milk, breast milk, being upwards of 50%, you know, could be 30%, 40%, upwards of 50% saturated fat. And it's primarily going to feed the developing human brain, the most complex, powerful entity in the known universe. Now, here's the rub. Those receptors are those channels to allow saturated fat into the human brain through the blood-brain barrier. When you're an infant and then moving into early childhood, they're open. But as time goes on, those receptors and the accessibility in the human brain to absorb saturated fats into the brain itself goes down until when you reach adulthood, they're all but shut off. But saturated fat is so important that the human brain will make it itself. Your brain as an adult, if it needs to, it'll make saturated fat itself. Crazy. However, dietarily speaking, much of the saturated fat we might consume in our diet as an adult does not go to your brain. Okay? So I just want to share that little tidbit there and understand that, again, the fat in foods does not directly translate to the fat on our bodies, right? Storage fat or structural fats. But there are specific fats that do contribute to the performance and rebuilding your structural fats in your brain. And let's talk about what those are. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition discovered that increasing dietary levels of DHA, the essential omega-3 fat DHA, was able to improve both memory and reaction time in healthy test subjects. DHA is such a critical part of memory formation that you can literally forget about making memories without it. You need DHA. It is so important as a structural fat and also in enabling and supporting communication between your brain cells. DHA is essential. Now, this gets into the conversation about this omega-3 category of essential fats. There's so many different types. Omega-6s are also essential fatty acids, and we need them. But our diets are now so skewed in the amounts of omega-3s we're getting versus omega-6. And so we go into that in the relevance with metabolism, but also in relevance with brain health today in the average American diet, which historically we'd have around 3-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Omega-6s are more noted to be the pro-inflammatory omega fatty acids, which we need them. We need them for certain processes, but being that they're pro-inflammatory, they can cause some major problems and also major problems with inflammation in our brain, which we'll get to in a moment. But the omega-3s are the anti-inflammatory category, and we need them as well to help to maintain that balance. And so, being that this is the case, we have to put a greater emphasis today more than ever, and everybody listening from this day forward, put an emphasis on getting DHA and EPA into your bodies. Your brain needs it. It craves it. It's one of the most important nutrients that we're simply not getting enough of. And most of us have no idea. This particular nutrient directly improves your memory. All right. We have study after study after study I put in Eat Smarter demonstrating how DHA and EPA specifically help to improve your memory. All right. It's clinically proven, study after study. Now, here's the other side of the conversation. These are so important for the structural integrity of the brain. Again, we're talking about structural fats and structural integrity. These are so important for the structural integrity of the brain that a study published in the journal Neurology using MRIs revealed that people consuming the lowest amount of EPA and DHA in their diets had accelerated brain shrinkage. Their brains were literally shrinking. This isn't the kind of shrinking when it's cold outside. All right, this isn't that kind of shrinkage. This isn't like, oh, the water, you get in the cold water and there's get some shrinkage. This is more of like the permanent kind, okay? Don't touch me, it's a shrinkage, it's cold. No, this is like, oh, my brain could be messed up for the rest of my life and cause degradation in my cognitive performance. We have to protect our brains and provide these essential nutrients. So EPA and DHA. They stated in the study that people who ate the least amount of DHA, which was less than 4 grams in this study, showed the highest rates of brain shrinkage, while those who ate 6 grams or more had the healthiest shrink-proofed brains. That barometer, that baseline is just about a teaspoon, a little more than a teaspoon a day, protected against accelerated brain aging and shrinkage. Nobody likes shrinkage. You want to be at your full glory. All right? Now, where are we going to get these from? Where are we getting our DHA and EPA? For most folks, it's attributed to fish and fish oil, but Eat Smarter is really a unifier. It's a unifier of all diet frameworks. So regardless of what diet framework you might have been subscribing to, whether it's vegan, whether it's paleo, whether it's keto, whether it's pescatarian, whatever the case might be, it is addressing the most powerful principles and nutrients across the board, regardless of your diet framework. It's a unifier. Nobody's excluded. All right. And also we're looking at what are the specific things in all of those diets that could damage your brain, that are common in various diets that can damage your brain and lead to accelerated brain aging, but also accelerated development of body fat, regardless of what diet you're on. So these are the things. Again, it's a great unifier. So being that most folks attribute DHA, EPA, omega-3s to fatty fish, these are, if you look at the data, these are great sources, including wild-caught salmon, herring, sardines, mackerel. But in our conversation that we've had with Dr. Lisa Mosconi, neuroscientist, she shared that, for example, one of the food sources that supersedes fish is caviar and salmon roe. So the salmon roe, the salmon eggs are upwards of 3 times more DHA per gram than the fish itself. It's packed. It's insane how much DHA and EPA you'll find in caviar and salmon roe. And when she told me about caviar, I'll just be real. I was just immediately, I had my pinky up like, oh, really? Like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous is what came up for me. Robin Leach. I don't know if people, if you're a little younger, you might not know. I don't know. But it was Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. I think it would come on for me, I guess I saw the replay, but Saturday night, Friday night. It was late Friday night. And late Friday night, because I would go to bed. I had to go to bed with my little brother and sister just so they go to bed, because my mom didn't want to show that there was some kind, I was her favorite, clearly. She didn't want to show that. So she'd be like, go to bed with your little brother and sister, and then when they go to sleep, you can come back and you can watch TV, hang out. All right? So I would do that Friday nights. They go to bed, maybe we'll just say 9 o'clock. Can I tell you how hurt I was when I would accidentally fall asleep? Because I'm just waiting for them to go to sleep. And then sometimes I open my eyes and it's Saturday and I'd be pissed. I missed all that good hanging out, all that good TV and the snacks that would come along with it. All right, because my stepdad would come in, he gets off work around 11. He comes in, he bring the pizza, all kinds of just adventures. But anyways, on the nights when I was successful in staying awake and watching TV, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, they take you and show you the lavish life, right? Then we had MTV Cribs, kind of transmuted into the more recent evolution of that show. But it would be Lifestyles of Rich and Famous, Twilight Zone. Oh, come on, freaky stuff right there. And Nightmare on Elm Street, the series. What was my mother let me do? I was like 7, 8, watching Freddy Krueger, freaking me out. I was addicted to getting freaked out. All right. And then eventually it'd be like Friday night videos too, because we know we didn't have that cable. You know, that's a super luxury. But Friday nights you get to see the videos, Friday night videos. So it's a whole vibe. It's a whole vibe. But being that this is the case of like in our minds psychologically, we'll hear certain foods and we're just like, that's not for me, or like, oh, that's this, that's that. Let's just bring this down to number one, the connection with humanity throughout our history and our evolution. Humans have been eating what we call this food caviar, you know, salmon roe, the fish eggs, for centuries, long time. But also then you might be like, I'm not feeling that. I'm just, regardless of if humans been eating it, I'm not really feeling it. That's great because we have other options. There's so many different ways, creative ways, but we also still, I want to encourage people, and this was just a strong tenet throughout Eat Smarter, is to look to food first. We want to do our best to get our sources of, right now we're talking about DHA and EPA, from foods that folks have been eating for centuries, for thousands of years, because our genes have a connection. Our DNA is connected to these foods.
Well, I talk about the value of getting sun on your skin, the value of exposing your body to variation in ambient temperature, just getting out into nature and being around greenery. There's just so many benefits associated with nature bathing. They're doing a lot of this research in Japan, but you know the benefits have become so obvious and so clear that now various universities and academic centers are studying how nature exposure can reduce cortisol, reduce anxiety, depression, things like that. But yeah, I mean, you know, there's that saying, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And today we've built these environments around us that we've created to ultimately coddle us, you know, whether it's the chronic climate control that we're exposed to, or the fact that the Environmental Working Group estimates that we spend 93% of our time indoors, out of the sun. There's just a lot that we've lost touch with. And so in that chapter, I talk about a few things. I talk about, for one, the value of getting vitamin D, of optimizing your vitamin D levels. So vitamin D is a steroid hormone that essentially controls the expression of 1,000 genes in the body, at least, which is 5% of the human genome. And it's important for keeping inflammation in check, keeping your blood pressure healthy, promoting arterial flexibility, which is the ability of your arteries to expand and contract in accordance with the needs of the organism as it navigates the environment. It's also being looked at now as a way of both preventing and treating autoimmunity. There's this really interesting study that found that children who were born during the summer months, meaning that women likely had higher, I think it was actually babies born in the winter months, meaning that women were spent most of their time pregnant in the summer months, so that they had higher levels of vitamin D. Ultimately ended up having lower risk of multiple sclerosis, or MS. And vitamin D is actually the only vitamin supplement where there's really a strong body of evidence now saying that vitamin D can potentially help as a therapeutic tool for sufferers of MS.
Oh man, I've seen even MS, but I've also seen rickets. Like literally somebody comes in, their child into my office, rickets, you know, just like they can walk over a tumbleweed, you know, like their legs are so bowed. Vitamin D, man, I mean, legs are amazing today.
Yeah. Vitamin D is important. I mean, people think about it really in terms of bone health and being able to prevent rickets. But it's important for so many things. I mean, there are vitamin D receptors in cells in every organ of your body. It's important for reducing inflammation in the brain. In fact, there was a very interesting small study, needs to be replicated, but they found that the mere supplementation with 800 international units of vitamin D per day in patients with, I believe it was Alzheimer's disease or a mild form of Alzheimer's disease. The supplementation, it was a randomized placebo-controlled trial, found that vitamin D supplementation was able to essentially halt the progress of the disease for a time. So again, small study. I wouldn't, take that as gospel at this point. But yeah, I mean, we know that vitamin D is good for us.
Yeah. So what do we do? Do we go out and just swipe down the store shelves of vitamin D? What is the optimal way to get our levels right?
I think you want to spend more time in the sun. So when our skin is exposed to the UVB rays from the sun, our skin creates vitamin D, or a precursor to the active hormone in the body, and then it has to be converted in the kidneys and the liver to the active hormone form. What I think most people don't realize about vitamin D, which was surprising and something that I discovered while writing the book, is that the enzymes that activate vitamin D in the body require magnesium. Mm-hmm. And 50% of the population does not consume adequate magnesium. So what that means is that you might be supplementing with vitamin D, you might be spending time in the sun, maybe even spending too much time in the sun burning, and you might not actually see your vitamin D levels budge on labs until you start consuming more magnesium. So I'm actually a huge fan of magnesium. I talk about that in the book. One of the primary drivers of aging, it's been posited, is DNA damage. And DNA damage is also at the root cause of cancer. And we have an ability in our bodies to repair against DNA damage. But all of the DNA damage, all of the DNA repair enzymes require magnesium. Mm-hmm. So again, like magnesium is like this amazing thing. We require it to create ATP, which is energy. If you're not consuming adequate magnesium, you're not going to be generating the energy that your body is capable of generating. You're not going to be repairing against DNA damage to your full capacity, and you're also not going to be creating vitamin D effectively.
So now the big question, and I totally agree with you. Like, this is something we humans evolved getting access to sunlight. Now we're spending 93% of our time indoors on average, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And we've created this fear of the sun. And truthfully, sun can't hurt you, but it's, for many people, you need more. You need more than the fear kind of construct has created. Now, with that said, what about folks you moved from New York, right?
Yeah.
You grew up in New York, right?
I grew up in New York City, yeah.
And then you, of course, like you're out here now, it's Cali sunny, but what about folks in NYC? What about folks in New England? What about folks in, Halifax, Canada? What do we do in the winter months?
That's a good question. It's funny. I moved out here and somehow I still look like you're staring into a tube of Elmer's glue. Like I need to get that. I need to practice what I preach is what I'm starting to think. So vitamin D, I think the best way to get it is from the sun, because the sun, you're not just getting vitamin D, you're getting a boost in nitric oxide, which occurs when our skin is exposed to the UVA rays from the sun. You're also getting adequate bright light to anchor your body's circadian rhythm, which I talk a lot about in the book, and the value of that. But yeah, there obviously is variation in our capacity to synthesize vitamin D. If you're older, you need to spend more time in the sun compared to when you're younger. You become less efficient at creating vitamin D in advanced age compared to younger people. If you have a darker complexion, you need to spend more time in the sun. Melanin is nature's sunscreen, so even though people with darker skin color might actually look better as they age, they still need to really be conscious of vitamin D and spending more time in the sun. People who are overweight actually need to spend more time in the sun than their thin counterparts, because vitamin D, like vitamin E, A, and K, is a fat-soluble vitamin. It gets sequestered by fat tissue. So if you've got some weight on you, you got to spend more time in the sun. That being said, you don't want to burn, but yeah, time in the sun I think is crucial. Now, because there's also seasonal variation, that's where I think eating foods that are high in vitamin D can come in to help get you to the next, time at which you can get out into the sun. And so fatty, oily fish, cold water fish, egg yolks, great source of vitamin D, a significant source of vitamin D through the diet. And then also we can store a little bit in our fat tissue as well.
Yeah, that's a little bit of an insurance. You can store some, so those months that you can get adequate sun exposure, you can store it up so you don't have to be neurotic, but at the same time, incorporating those foods, maybe some high quality supplementation for those that need it. It's such an important nutrient. Like you said, this is a steroid hormone.
Yeah.
But so with that said, also we want to do this as natural as possible. Let our body kind of figure it out and get sunlight. So what's the best way about getting the sunlight exposure? Just like arms being out in your shirt, going out for a walk, shirt off. There's some research with getting some sun on Laysac. It can help to boost testosterone.
I've heard that, yeah.
Now, what about, so are we saying, so like get some on your back?
Yeah.
What about the butthole tanning?
Oh, man,
Max?
I've seen that, yeah.
So many of our friends even like, taking the pictures, the butthole tanning.
I know. I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, one of the guys who really made it popular, I know him. He lives in West Hollywood. His name is Ra. I've had him on my podcast.
No way is his name Ra.
His name is Ra of Earth. And I've had him on my show. We talk all about butthole sunning. I forget which episode it is, but it's there. The Genius Life. And but yeah, it's a thing. You know what? There's a lot of people in the evidence-based camp that like will poo-poo, no pun intended, that whole practice. But you know what? Like, if you enjoy the way that it feels, do it. I mean, you're still going to be creating vitamin D down there. Is there any magical thing that's going to happen by exposing your butthole to the sun? I don't think so. I mean, the sun is a powerful disinfectant. So maybe, maybe there's some truth there that this ancient wisdom, they found that it was a good way to clean up somehow, with the sun. But, dude, I don't know. I think generally the more surface area you can expose to the sun, the better. Now, you're still, like, the sun can still photo age you. So if you're going to spend, an excessive amount of time in the sun, you might want to put some sunblock on your face. You might want to, if you're going on vacation and you think that you might end up burning, which is not good, sunblock. I talk all about chemical sunblocks in the book and how you want to avoid those. So if you are going to go for a sunblock, I always recommend like a zinc oxide, like a mineral-based sunscreen. And I'm also a huge fan of a supplement called astaxanthin, which is a marine carotenoid. It's found in wild salmon and crustaceans, and it actually acts like a sunscreen from the inside out. So I take astaxanthin every single day, but I also will kind of like double down if I know that I've got like a trip to the tropics coming up or something like that.
Fascinating. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Krill is like the big source.
Krill's great.
For the astaxanthin. So, wow, that's great stuff. So we got vitamin D, and you also mentioned magnesium. So let's hit on just a couple of foods for people to target with magnesium. And also, what about supplementation?
Yeah. So foods that are high in magnesium, I always prefer getting my minerals from food, but magnesium is sort of an exception that I make. I'll supplement with magnesium. I take magnesium glycinate, which is magnesium bound to glycine. It's not going to upset your stomach. If you take too much magnesium citrate, which is a cheaper form of it, it might give you diarrhea because it draws water into the gut. So I'll take that. But generally, foods that are high in magnesium, you can't beat pumpkin seeds. They're a very high source, very rich source. Dark chocolate is actually a great source. Almonds are a wonderful source. And I just learned this today, actually, that Brazil nuts are also a fantastic source. And when you eat either of those four foods, you're getting with them a ton of other micronutrients. So I'm a huge fan of dark chocolate. It's great for the brain, great for the cardiovascular system. Almonds are rich in vitamin E, which is a wonderful protector molecule for the brain. Brazil nuts are rich in selenium, which is a great protector molecule for the brain as well. So you really can't go wrong. Magnesium is it's important. And again, half of the population doesn't consume adequate amounts of it. It's actually like it's like a longevity supplement in a way, I think.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here. And also make sure to subscribe to the Model Health Show.
Poverty, violence, depression, they're all connected by food, and no one's told the story. Not only do people not understand that it's all one problem, but they don't understand that there's elegant, simple solutions that can fix all of it.